What's up, folks? I'm Odd, by the way, and welcome back to Random Character Roller, essentially. So today I think that I'm going to be taking my homemade little character roller here, which at the moment it's available for download on itch.io. If you want to go grab it, I'll link to it again. But yeah, I did a whole video talking about this the other day. If you also want to see that, then I will link that. It's not very much. It's really just kind of a fancy random number generator almost, but it allows you to roll fantasy, like D&D style fantasy characters. And a particular choice that I decided for my own benefit was to roll a hybrid, so I figured that we would roll a hybrid today and see what we got. Got my coffee? And let's draw some fantasy creatures. So I think we should just dive right in, right? Oh geez. 9 foot tall. Cleric. A warforged squirrel folk. Agender, skin tone can vary. A 9 foot tall robot squirrel. Okay. I may or may not keep the height. Copy, put this down here. Okay. Our next selection then. Another hybrid. 9 foot tall, again. Is that all you can roll today? Ranger. Goblin Centaur. Non-binary. Green. Green works for this. Green definitely works. Okay. Correct. Do one more. Boop. Again with the 9 foot tall. One. You can do more, right? Okay. Well, I completely disregarded our previous selections. So let's just roll again. A 5 foot tall, there we go, ranger, between a goblin and a satyr. We already got a goblin today. Do I want to do another one? Another 9 foot tall. I already did a warforged. I already did a minotaur. There we go. 4 foot tall fighter, hedgehog and bugbear, and a man. I was just making sure my game wasn't, you know, glitching, but... okay. Well, we've got our selection today. Let me pop you down. Boop. Okay. And these are quite small. Let me zoom in here. Again. 9 foot tall cleric, warforged squirrel folk. 9 foot tall ranger, goblin and centaur. 4 foot tall fighter, hedgehog, folk, and bugbear. Okay. And again, I guess any of these varieties don't necessarily need to be there. I think that I'm just gonna go for the hybrid this time around. But I'll let the color and the maybe the height and the gender selection guide me a little bit, I think. In terms of the robot squirrel folk, I'm curious, like, obviously, this isn't a night at the tavern. The other two could be. This is not. This is like an experiment that is some affront to the gods. There's a warforged squirrel folk. But I'm imagining something kind of like woodsy. Like maybe the squirrel folk, like, made this cyborg slash robot so to resemble themselves, and that it's really just kind of a squirrel-shaped warforged, or it's a cyborg. I guess I'll have to see which one I want to play with. Goblin and Centaur is fun. Ranger makes sense for the class, honestly, but this just feels like a whole bunch of chaos, really, and a very small centaur. What kind of goblin centaur are we talking about? Like a goat? I know that the height says that it's 9 feet tall, but I'm thinking maybe given the fact that goblins are usually a smaller race, we could take the peripheral off on the side of my game there that says if you roll at the smaller race, you can divide the height by 2. So what, that's 4.5 feet tall? That makes sense. And then hedgehog folk and bugbear. I need to look up a bugbear because I know they look different than you'd expect them to. They're not just a bug and a bear. But very whimsical and kind of reminds me, there's this like Beauty and the Beast style story about a man who was a hedgehog. Like, I watched it on Jim Henson's The Storyteller, and I forget what it's called, but like there's a story where a pair of parents where the wife desperately wants a child, or a married couple where the wife desperately wants the child and wishes for one and gets a hedgehog baby, human hybrid thing, and then he grows up and then like kind of becomes like the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, and this princess tries to marry him, and like he turns into a man during the nighttime, and they think that they have to burn his pelt to get him to turn into a man all the time, but that's not really the case. And then it's like Beauty and the Beast, where like love kind of sets him free from his quill form, you know. So that's what that reminds me of off the top of my head. Weird memory to come back on, but I freaking loved watching The Storyteller on Netflix, so I'm here for it. But at that, I think I'm going to roll over to speed paint voiceover and see what I can do with these characters. I'll see you there. So first up, we have the Warforged Squirrelfolk Cleric. Similar to the first set I did with my roller, I did try to implement the random color that was rolled to, at least a little bit. The colors can help with inspiration, even if they don't seem to fully encapsulate the vibe, TM. For the green shade in this roll, it turned out very nice for some leafy accents, because I imagine a squirrel-based society to still be very woodsy. I went for a cyborg sort of character made out of wooden parts and few, like, minimal metal pieces with oak leaf and acorn accents, because squirrels like acorns. Similarly, I gave our cleric a great big sort of morning star / warhammer that also looks like a very spiky acorn. Because oaks and squirrels can both be red, I made this character a red fox squirrel and gave them a crystalline red heart and named them Red Oak Heart. Red Oak Heart, or just Red, was a relatively regular guard in a long-standing oak settlement and was a devoted worshipper of the Great Tree. The squirrel folk believe in the Great Tree of Life, and that all tree roots grow to connect back to it. Some even believe that the whole world is held together by the roots of the trees, and that all souls go back to the earth, and therefore, eventually back to the Great Tree. One day, a great tragedy struck. The giant oak Red's people resided on caught fire in the middle of the night. By the time many people have noticed, the flames had gotten too big to put out. Red took it upon himself to ed their people out of the tree, even going toward the inferno in the lower branches. As the charred oak began to fall, Red was trying to help some displaced children who had gotten lost within the hollows of the tree. A branch, large enough to host a home, fell suddenly, and Red jumped to push the children out of the way. Red knew this was a sacrifice, and possibly in vain, but they had to do something. A burning branch pierced their heart as the limb fell atop Red instead, and the children were pushed away. But a prayer was heard that night. The dying tree supplemented Red with its heart, a burning red amber, and something overcame Red's body. Empowered by some unknown force, they were granted the strength to lift the branches and usher the lowercase to safety. Red was recovered from the embers by them later, unconscious, limbs destroyed, but alive, with the crystalline amber embedded in their chest. The artificers of their people knew a sign when they saw it, and fashioned limbs and armor for them out of the remaining holy wood of their fallen tree and the little ore they had access to. The oak's heart granted Red full control over their new limbs when they woke up. They had only flashes of memory, but almost instinctually knew that this event was no mere wildfire. Still feeling unworthy of their people's lauding them of a hero while these assailants were still at large, the newly named Red Oak Heart vowed to find whoever did this to their home, and why. I don't know why my brain was so fascinated by the idea of religious squirrel lore, but I really wanted to make a cool tree religion for this cleric. This is another kind of backstory-based hybrid, given Red is really just kind of like a holy cyborg. They also give slight druidic vibes, but I don't think they have much control over nature. It's just sort of what their religion is. I do have a connection to squirrels, particularly the more common gray squirrel. I just love them. But red fox squirrels are super cool too, those ear tufts. Red Oak is also very Iron Man-esque with their red amber heart. I'd totally play a character like this. Next up, we have the Goblin Centaur Ranger. Listen, I have a bone to pick about Rangers. Why do they suck? They feel like they're just set up for someone like me to think the flavor seems cool and then be met with the harsh reality that they're basically just rogues, but bad. Totally not speaking from experience or anything. My Baldur's Gate 3 tab doesn't still need a class change to be playable or anything. But still, I feel like there is so much potential for Rangers, especially story-wise. Like, rogues feel like Batman. They're made for skulking around through back alleys as thieves or assassins, the greater city, like hiding within the crowd sort of types. Rangers feel like Robin Hood, who is also a thief, I guess, but they feel more like someone on the edges of society or just straight up living in the forest and fending for themselves against bandits and monsters alike. They're maybe just a touch feral, but they hurt to play. Why? I don't understand. Tangent aside, this design was like the only one of the three that didn't require several iterations of sketching before I was happy with it, although that time sketching was maybe redirected to the pose and the crossbow, but I basically stuck with the initial idea that really sparked joy in me, a little goblin goat tar. I wanted a very bouncy, chipper character, maybe a little younger, and gosh, that little face, I just want to smush it! I gave him some longer ears, little horns, and goat-like pupils to bring the goat up a little bit, just for the kind of more cohesive aesthetic. I named them Finny, and I don't really know why. I just felt like it fit. Like, look at that bean. That's Finny. Finnegan, Finny, or just Finn, is a living question mark. Finn was left abandoned by a goblin orphanage as a baby, and the questions about his parentage began instantly. Some speculated that Finn was obviously the result of a torrid affair between a goblin and a regular centaur, and that their goat-like features were just what those genes looked like on a goblin. Others supposed that even more scandalous possibilities, like a shepherd getting a little too close with his goats, not exactly expecting to wind up with consequences. Or perhaps Finn was just a regular freak of nature, a curse, divine intervention, first-generation true goblin tar, who knows. Regardless, Finny was generally ignored unless they were being gawked at. Not a fun combination. One night, Finn overheard his caretakers discussing a very lucrative bribe to apprentice Finn at a freak show the next time the circus came around. Basically, they were selling him. Finn instead decided to finally take matters into his own hands for no one but him, and he stole off with a crossbow, learning how to use it in secret. When the day came that the circus was back in town, Finny was nowhere to be found, and the banner of the show was mysteriously shot down with a flaming arrow. Finn ran away into the woods, vowing to find their own origins, thank you very much, while hunting and stealing pretty effectively enough to get by. Finn eventually ran into a goblinoid in a very similar situation before finding Red Oakheart, but we'll get into that in a moment. Generally speaking, Finn is just really happy to be on his own and loves to cause a little bit of harmless mischief. Finn had to grow up quick, but is still a kid, baby goat, so often bites off way more trouble than they can chew. Gotta love a chaotic goblin child. The roller gave me non-binary, so I took that more as that, like, Finny doesn't really care about gender norms, maybe even never bothered to learn about them, given they eschew all other norms, and is pretty fluid in expression, still figuring out who he is and all that. It's either advantageous or unfortunate that I got a centaur who can use a bow, which is quite cliche in my mind, but Finny gets to step it up with a crossbow. I could totally see them dual-wielding it later on. Finally, we have the Hedgehog Folk and Bugbear. I had to look up bugbears, and as I mentioned in Finny's description, they are referred to as goblinoids, at least in D&D. The description and the pictures really just gave kind of like a hairy goblin with some more like semi-bear-like traits. This is probably the character where the sketch took the most time among these three. I think that the fighter class was especially hard to pin down, along with trying to draw a sort of cohesive hybrid like this. Then I saw that there are thrown projectile fighters, and stuff just sort of started to click into place then. As sentient characters with quills could totally opt to just throw them. It doesn't seem like hedgehogs can eject their quills quite like porcupines, so maybe this guy just keeps some fallen out spears to huck at people like a javelin or trims them. I can't imagine straight up taking them out would be very comfortable. It's a limited ammo source, but I guess they could also be recovered, very painfully, given they probably still have barbs. I also discovered that trying to mush a hedgehog face with a kind of humanoid goblin bear sort of face and big ears creates a mogwai. Especially leading into the hedgehog markings made him look so much like Gizmo from Gremlins, the mogwai. So his name is Gizmo. Like, I'm sorry I had to. It also fits totally perfectly with like a fantasy naming lexicon, especially for a goblin-like creature. Like, you tell me there wouldn't be a goblinoid named Gizmo. It just fits. I did also wind up using the word hedge for his species because hedgehog folk is somehow more of a mouthful than squirrel folk. Gizmo was born to fight, the child of a captured hedge forced to lay with a bugbear and bear its child for her freedom. At least that's what he was told in the pit. He didn't initially care about his origins. He liked to be a gladiator. It was the only life he knew. He made his way up the ranks until eventually he was set to face his own father. The knowledge did come back to him as he was caged across from him that night, and he scorned his father, despite knowing he too may have been captive, just like Gizmo and his mother, that perhaps he could have simply refused, but his father surprised him with his shock. Instead, the old man told a different story. A girl who showed him kindness, offered herself willingly in his winning quarters, and who had her life torn away from her when the coordinators found out she was pregnant. They kept her captive and assured her the child would only be a monster, agreeing to release her if she gave them the child when it was born. She reluctantly agreed only after Gizmo's father swore he would watch after the boy. The two never crossed paths again. Gizmo had no reason to humor this desperate old man, but the idea still stirred in his head all through the next day. When Gizmo and his father finally faced off, that's how his father bested him. Immediately, Gizmo thought he'd been foolish to even humor his father. This was some sort of mind game, but as he struggled in the elder's grasp, his father whispered, "Play dead." Gizmo froze, both in thought and physically. His father had enacted some strange spell on him, and he felt just a few inches above his body, practically watching himself to be checked for vitals and dragged away, his father being declared the winner. As he regained mobility just outside of the arena, Gizmo realized this was his father giving him an escape. He took it in stride, quickly removing a broken quill as soon as he could move and piercing it through the guards before they could make any noise, and in a blur did the same to whoever got in his way, but there were very few guards aware of what was effectively a living corpse on the loose. He considered going back for his father, but there wouldn't be a lot of time where he would have the upper hand. Vowing to come back, he set off on his own mission to somehow find his mother and get her side of the story. Shortly afterward, he came across a fellow goblinoid, or at least half of one, so another hybrid like himself. This one seemed to have narrowly escaped Gizmo's fate, and was still a child. Vinny practically glued themselves to Gizmo, and was the first time that he felt like someone saw him not just as formidable, but possibly befriendable. Vinny explained similar goals of finding his parents, and they probably weren't of the woodland folk, though he supposed they very well could be as well. While the two had sought out the outer edges of the great groves the woodland folk like the squirrels in the hedges lived in, they came across Red Oak Heart. Red heard their stories, mostly through Finny. They had taken to talking for Gizmo, who was not a man of many words. Red Oak Heart offered to lead them through the grove, given they knew it far better. If they were just a little concerned about an overly precocious child and a man who had never seen the outside of the pits traversing their forest unsupervised, they didn't say so. I do love a good twist throwing a character's whole worldview off balance. I'd imagine there's probably some deep self-hatred involved in Giz thinking he was born in a horrific way, and then being told he was in fact possibly the result of basically the reverse in a tragic love story. That he maybe has someone who could love him as he is. Oh, feelings. The overall vibe of this group is actually quite whimsical to me, and I feel like it would suit a whole woodland creature society type of adventure, like the kinds I'm pretty sure the squirrel and hedgehog folk come from in D&D. It would make sense that there are many other ungulate tars in the grove, but maybe all Finny finds there is a lead, who knows. He's probably going to be adopted anyway. Unlike last time, though Red and Giz could co-parent, I don't know if I see them as being romantic. Honestly, it's more like Red adopted both of these two because Gizmo is quite brand new to the outside world, but this story could obviously go in a lot of directions. But those are my pieces and characters for this week. I really like how these characters turned out. I really felt like I vibed with the style here today. So let me know which of these is your favorite. Honestly, I'm completely torn this week because I would totally play Red, but I adore Finny and I really like Gizmo's design and backstory. Such a cute little face for such a rough guy. At that though, I'm gonna leave this here, and I'll see y'all next time.